Hi, I'm Brendan Bushy, and I was motivated to make this video by an email I got the other day. Um, the email came to me, it was from a man who's 56 years old, and I've known him his entire life. He's the son of an old friend of mine, so I knew him when he was in his mom's belly. The He wrote me an email, and I didn't quite know how to respond. And I thought it over, and I wrote back to him, "You need help." And then I thought, I need to really clarify that because he knows me and he knows my background. And I believe he needs help, but I don't want him to misunderstand what I mean by help. So let me just tell you a quick thing about me. I'm 78 years old. For a good portion of my life, I was a clinical social worker. I was clinically licensed in 5 states. I had some special certifications. I worked in large state hospitals, mental hospitals, forensic facilities, prisons. I worked in private hospitals, private clinics, public clinics, not for profit facilities, practices. I was in private practice. I was on provider panels, which means I was eligible to collect insurance from companies that insured people who were coming to see me. I was given some awards. I was appointed to uh, some advisory boards, the last one being here in Delaware by then Governor Minna, had to do with foster care. I originated in New York. Before I left New York, I was an advisor to Suffolk County's Health Committee. I've testified in public hearings before various government bodies. Uh, I have had hospital privileges in public hospitals, private hospitals, even military hospitals. Um, all this means is I think I have what a friend of mine years ago called a considered opinion. So, so here's my considered opinion on what I think therapy is. I think a lot of what we call therapy is not therapy. So let me explain that. First, let me say that a lot of what we call healthcare is not exactly healthcare. Our system of healthcare is based upon profit. So the main focus of all those working in the system is to produce profits. Um, that makes healthcare a business, not an art, not necessarily a calling. If you don't think that's significant, oh well, I do. In terms of the kind of therapy I did as a clinical social worker, I was dealing with people who had what was called mental illness. They had emotional problems. I'm more comfortable saying they had emotional problems than I am saying they suffered from mental illness because I'm not sure I really believe in mental illness. And if that sounds strange, I'm not alone. The Years ago, I read a number of books by Thomas Szasz, who was a psychiatrist in New York. If you're interested in whether or not there's such a thing as mental illness, I'd read some of his books and see what you think. The I think it's important to understand that therapy takes place in a context, or what we call therapy takes place in a context. And the context is a subcontext and a larger context, and then a larger context, and so on. So the subcontext is in the place that the therapist and the client, or the therapist and the patient, are interacting. The overall overarching context is the country in which they live. Below that would be the state. Below that would be the family they're part of. Below that would be any religious affiliations they have. You get the idea. We live, and I'm talking about this based upon my experiences in the United States, because I don't have any experiences outside of the United States with any of this. I've read about it. So let me make this clear. The We live in a structured society. It's hierarchical. We live in the United States, and our country uh, is based upon a constitution that was written in the 1700s. And our country has evolved over time, but we are still living within that context. So if you want to talk about living in America or living in the United States, uh, if you ignore that, you're missing a lot. And if you understand that we live in a structure that was created in the 1700s, let me explain this. The structure was modeled on the structure that was used in pre-imperial Rome. What can I tell you? Times have changed, but doesn't seem like we've done that much in the way of change. In terms of hierarchy, what do I mean? I mean, some people will call it class, some people will call it caste. The um, Back when this country, the United States, was first forming, and in the Carolinas prior to the United States uh, being formed the way it is now, there was a large land grant by the King of England to some noble. I can't remember his name. And he gave a huge area of land to this noble. It's interesting that a king in England would be giving land here to a noble here who came over from England. Um, I guess I would question the whole idea of ownership of land, or if you want to accept the idea of ownership of land, who was the king to give the land to anybody? He wasn't born here, it wasn't his land. But that's another story. But the important thing I wanted to mention about that is that guy and a friend of his, who was another elite, came up with a structure. It was three-tiered. So there was a ruling class, there was the next level down, which I don't want to even attempt to describe, and then there was the lower class. But the lower class, the most interesting thing about the lower class, okay, is that they were obliged to obey the ruling class. And the class they were in was perpetual for them, for both them and all their offspring, going on into future generations. Now, what kind of world do you think that was? Okay. What kind of problems do you think those people faced? Now, We have a structured society now. We pretend we don't. We talk about equality, all that. But, bottom line is we have a structured society. And at the top of our structure, okay, we have wealthy people, oligarchs. After that, we have um, people of privilege who aren't oligarchs. And after that, we have kind of everybody else. So if you're born here in this country, okay, you're born into something, you're born into a structure. And I would contend that this entire structure at every level is dysfunctional. That's a word we use in therapy. It's part of our jargon. It's dysfunctional because it's not exactly what I would call natural. I don't know that much about tribal peoples, but I know a little bit because I've been studying and I've been reading. So, specifically, in certain tribal societies, there was no such thing as, for instance, ownership of land or deeds or mortgages or even money. People lived in close proximity to each other. They shared in the work. Um, they took care of each other. It's like being part of a large extended family. The things they faced was survival. So gathering food, dealing with the elements, dealing with other people who were not part of their tribe. Those were things they were concerned with, but they didn't have the modern pressures, I use modern, that we all have. So there was no expectation, for instance, that you grow up, buy a home, own a property, develop a career, earn money, practicing your career or your profession or your trade. There was, I think, different kind of expectations, but I don't think they're at all similar to what we have today. And I think that in those societies, there wasn't a lot of what we call mental illness today. And I'm really sure there weren't a lot of psychotropic drugs being dispensed to treat those people who were upset. I'm sure there wasn't things like electroshock therapy or insulin shock therapy or lobotomies or any of the other barbaric things we've attempted to do over time and still do to some extent. So I just want to be clear that I think that what people are experiencing today are not the result of some individual deficit. It's not a disease they have. It's not an illness. It's a question of adjusting to an insane environment or a dysfunctional environment. The um, there are problems. People experience problems that are organic in nature and non-organic in nature. Um, those that are non-organic are what we tend to call emotional. And the organic problems, if I can call it that, some of those certainly things like illnesses, results of accidents, broken arm, right? Um, those are different. Okay. So there are illnesses, okay, that result of bacteria. And one of the ways you can treat them is with an antibiotic. And I know firsthand because I was hospitalized for a severe infection and it got pretty bad. And if it had not been for antibiotics, I would have been dead. I wouldn't be talking to you. But those are not emotional problems. And what I, the way I like to conceive of this for myself is in terms of trauma. Trauma, okay, is experiences that overwhelm us, or traumatic experience is an experience that overwhelms us. It can overwhelm us emotionally, it can overwhelm us physically. You could be in a car crash, sustain brain damage, physical trauma. You can be in a car crash and not sustain any physical injury whatsoever and experience what I would call emotional trauma. You could even experience things like what we refer to as PTSD. You send troops into war, and they're in environments where all hell is breaking loose, horror, and they come back and they're experiencing, or they're labeled as PTSD. And I guess I don't know that you need a label, but they have a label. But what they're really experiencing is the result of being overwhelmed by horror, life-threatening horror. So how do you deal? How do you deal with people? First, you need to understand that people, before you get to see them, they've been experiencing things and dealing with other people who are telling them different things. People, for instance, young people go to high school or go to grammar school or go to college and they experience emotional problems there. Part of it is because maybe they just don't fit in. And maybe they don't fit in because they've experienced other kinds of dysfunction in the families they were raised in. I The best example I can give of this, okay, in a small family, uh, deeply religious Catholic family, Italian, raised in Brooklyn, New York. I was born in the 40s, 46. So let's say around that time. So you have all kinds of expectations, right? You're in the United States, you're in a family, family members may have come from Europe, been involved in World War II. They're bringing their own concerns, their own problems, their own worries into the mix. You're being raised in that. And then you're part of a community and there are expectations for you. You have roles that are defined for you based upon your gender. You have roles or expectations that are developed for you based upon your membership in the Catholic Church. You have a concept of heaven and hell and sin and condemnation, damnation. um, you may be subjected to physical punishment in school or in church or in your family. So let's say someone grows up and they have a child. And let's say that someone has had a hard time growing up because she was, talk about a woman, brought into a family, um, and she was the child of one of the parents prior to that parent marrying the partner they now have, prior to your parents. I'm saying this poorly. What can I tell you? But she's overwhelmed. She comes into an already dysfunctional family, and the whole family becomes even more dysfunctional because everybody's adjusting to everybody else, and there's all kinds of things going on, resentments, competitions. And so she finds solace in extreme religion, gets educated, has a master's degree, gets married, has children. And the children are expected to be um, perfect because her image of herself is that she's somehow defective coming into this family in the way she did, maybe like Cinderella. So if there's one thing she wants, it's for her children not to be uh, in any way not functioning properly, not suffering in the way she suffered, beyond reproach. Maybe I should say it that way. So the expectations for the child or the children that she raises are very rigid. And the Catholic Church, Catholic doctrine plays a big piece of it, but not all of it, but a big piece of it. And the child grows up, is goes to college, bright kid, and comes apart in college. And I'll jump to the thing here. The short version is that the child in college for the first time is free, is dealing with peers who come from all different backgrounds. Their orientations are totally different. They certainly are not all Catholic. They're not all rigid. There is certainly a different sexual environment the child is in. The child is having normal, right? Normal development, right? As a woman developing from uh, an adolescent into an adult, they're maturing and they're having urges and cravings and what have you. I don't know how else to describe it. And that's things that were never discussed, things that were considered taboo. So the child has their first sexual experience and is freaking out over it. So the woman, being a a contemporary professional, uh, sends the child to see psychiatrists. They start reinforcing for the child that there's something wrong with the child. They're giving the child medicines. So there must be something wrong with the child. What the child's experiencing can't just be anxiety or confusion because you don't give people medicine if they're confused. If you pull up to a traffic light and you're not sure whether you need to go straight or make a right or a left, that's not an illness. That's confusion. And, you know, you wouldn't resolve that by going to a doctor and getting some prescription for medicine. You try to get help finding out where you are and where you want to get to is and the best way to do it. But the child is put on the medicine, and the medicine causes damage to the child, lifelong damage. And ultimately, the child is in and out of mental hospitals, goes through all kinds of different treatments, and ends up committing suicide after she's raped state psychiatric hospital. So, um, was that child mentally ill? I can tell you she wasn't. Was she traumatized? You bet. All along the way. The rigidity with which she was raised, the expectations, the religious overlay, the guilt, and then being labeled as in some to some degree defective, ill, being put on medications. The medications cause more problems. Now you end up with permanent physical problems as a result of the medications. Everything you're experiencing is telling you there's something wrong with you, and you don't know how to fix it. And the only way anybody's telling you you can fix it is to give you medications. Doesn't work. And eventually you get to a point where you kill yourself. That's not an uncommon thing. So I guess what I'm saying is, and I hope I'm being coherent here, is that I think therapy is something else. Healing is something else. Therapy is dealing with trauma. Therapy is, and it doesn't have to involve another person, but it could. But therapy is understanding your trauma, right? Therapy is relaxing, gaining support, support from others, um, seeing yourself as traumatized as opposed to defective, learning new skills to adapt, adjusting your expectations for yourself, um, forming your own opinions, not simply following dogma. That could happen in a lot of ways. And if there's a therapist involved, that would be, I would think, a supportive person who wouldn't tell the person they were defective, instead would ask the person, what's happening? How can I help? Pointing out resources that are available. So I guess what I'm saying is that when I suggest someone get help, I'm suggesting to them that they are traumatized to some degree and that they get involved in some process that helps them to relax, feel supported and nurtured, and helps them clarify what's happening for themselves. I don't know if I made a lot of sense. I, I if you're working with someone who's been traumatized, and my contention is growing up in America, we've all been traumatized to varying degrees. Some trauma is heavy and some's not. Some people can handle trauma better than others, but getting help is understanding that you're uncomfortable and that you need to gain a perspective. You need to learn to relax. You need to take care of yourself. You need to get nurturing from other people. That's getting help. Getting help is understanding you need to take care of your well-being. So eating right, sleeping right, exercising right. Getting help is understanding that it's up to you to decide what's of value to you, that you're not on this planet to live up to somebody else's expectations or to fulfill somebody else's idea of what you should be. If you're part of a dysfunctional family, and the gentleman I suggested get help is indeed part of a dysfunctional family, um, he's going to need more resources that are simply available in his family. And the other thing, part of taking care of yourself, is not abusing yourself. And people do that. They abuse substances, they abuse alcohol, they abuse drugs, legal drugs, illegal drugs, they abuse them. They engage in certain kinds of behavior, which is destructive. Gambling, um, joining cults. I'm trying to think of, there's probably a million I'll think of after this, but those are the things that quickly jump to mind. Joining, getting overly involved in political parties, forming an identity based upon a label. Those things don't help you resolve your day-to-day concerns. Getting in debt. Talk about things that are detrimental to your well-being. Getting in debt. And our whole society, at least in this country, our main industry in this country is creating debt for people, is putting people in debt. So if you buy into that, if you have, I grew up, right? I'm part of an Italian Catholic family, raised in Brooklyn, went to Catholic school. By the time I hit high school, I expected to be a good Catholic. I expected to get married, have a family, provide for my family. Uh, I expected to be the man of the house. Um, that was all kind of crazy. Doesn't make Didn't make a lot of sense to me then. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me now. When I talk to people, when I raised my child, and I didn't raise my child by myself. It wasn't my child, it was a child Kathy and I had. So our orientation as parents was to teach her the skills she needs to survive, teach her how to, how to think for yourself, how to form your own opinions, how to explore for yourself, how to be creative, reinforce creative ventures. Um, Not expecting her to marry or not marry, to have a husband or a wife or anything, just allowing her to figure out what she wanted and to pursue it. That was my orientation. That was Kathy's orientation. It wasn't based upon gender. Um, it wasn't based upon conformity. There was no expectation that she conform. The expectation is she finds meaning in her life and pursues those things that give her meaning. That her happiness, her comfort, her well-being was more important than her status. I really don't know if I'm making any sense. But this is my this is my thing on therapy or on getting help. So if you ever hear me say to someone, I think you need to get help, I hope you have a better idea of it than you did before you heard this video. Um, we don't have to be alone. That doesn't mean we have to live with somebody, but we don't have to shoulder every burden all by ourselves. We can share our vulnerabilities with people. We can share our concerns. We need to learn how to do that in a way where we don't allow others to exploit us. There are a lot of people out there who have pat answers for you, particularly in religious organizations, particularly in political organizations, political and social organizations. I don't think those answers work, you know. Uh, I think you have to come up with your own answers. What's important for you to know is that it's okay to be confused. It's okay to be frightened sometimes. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be different than your parents. It's okay to be different than your friends. And that, this, it's okay not to win. In our dysfunctional society, competition is a big thing. And I don't think competition is a good thing. I think cooperation is a better thing. I don't think getting rich is an important thing. I think being comfortable with who you are and living a healthy life, I think that's an important thing. I don't know what else I got. I think I'm rambling. And if I'm rambling, that's okay. Hey, I, there's no expectation here for myself. I'm just trying my best to communicate, and this is the best I got at the moment. And I thank you for putting up with me. Um, oh, it's what? December 18th. So we're in the middle of a holiday season. And for what it's worth, Kathy and I, we really don't celebrate holidays. The three big holidays that we used to celebrate with families and friends was Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. All of them have religious connotations. All of them have been economies have developed around them. Merchandise is sold in relation to them. So we don't need an occasion, a holiday, to get together with people and share some time, share some food, share in our lives, bring people up to date. When I was a kid, I really loved Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter. I look forward to them. They, but that was part of the bubble I was raised in. That was part of the dysfunction I lived in. And if you don't think uh, my learning about expectations for me around Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, if you don't think those were heavy duty, you don't understand the world I was raised in. It wasn't just a time to get together and have a meal, which you can do anytime. You don't have to do them on those particular holidays. When I worked, it was nice to have those holidays because I like to have days off. That was, but so back, we don't celebrate holidays. If you celebrate holidays, knock yourself out. If you are getting together with people and doing something, I hope you have a great experience and a great time. The Take care of yourselves. If you need help, get it.